Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Warren Parker adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, the morning light filtering through the windows of his modest two-story home in Millbrook Heights. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen the world's darker corners and emerged stronger. His graying temples and the thin scar above his left eyebrow told stories he rarely shared, even with his wife, Andrea. "Dad, you're going to be late again," called Julie Parker from the kitchen, her 16-year-old voice carrying that perfect mixture of affection and exasperation that only daughters could master. Warren smiled, straightening his shoulders. After 12 years in Army intelligence and another 8 building his private security consultation firm, punctuality had become something of a flexible concept. His real schedule was dictated not by client meetings, but by the safety protocols he'd established for his family. Protocols born from a professional paranoia that Andrea often teased him about. "Better late than sorry, kiddo," he replied, walking into the kitchen where Andrea was packing Julie's lunch. His wife of 18 years looked up with those green eyes that had first captured him at a coffee shop near Fort Bragg. She was still beautiful. Those stress lines had appeared around her eyes since she'd started working as a victim's advocate at the courthouse. The Henderson contract came through, Warren said, pouring coffee into his travel mug. 6 months of security consulting for their pharmaceutical company. "It'll cover Julie's college fund, and then some." Andrea smiled, but Warren caught the flicker of concern she tried to hide. She knew his work occasionally brought dangerous elements into their orbit, though he'd been careful to keep the family insulated from his more high-risk clients. Julie bounded into the kitchen, backpack slung over her shoulder. She was Warren's pride, honor student, captain of the debate team, and possessed of a moral compass that sometimes worried him. In a world where corruption often went unpunished, her faith in justice felt both precious and fragile. "Dad, can you pick me up after practice today? Mom's got that late meeting with the DEA." "Absolutely. Theater practice ends at 6, right?" "6:30 now. We're working on the final scenes for Hamlet." Warren nodded, already calculating routes and timing. "Old habits. I'll be there at 6:25. As Julie headed for the door, Warren caught her arm gently. "Remember what we talked about?" She rolled her eyes but smiled. "Stay aware of my surroundings, trust my instincts, and call you immediately if anything feels off. That's my girl." After they left, Warren sat in his home office, reviewing client files. The Henderson contract was legitimate corporate security assessment, threat analysis, nothing that would raise flags. But Warren's real expertise lay elsewhere. His Army intelligence background had taught him how to gather information, how to read people, and most importantly, how to identify the hidden networks that connected power and corruption. His phone buzzed. A text from his former colleague, Salvador Decker, now working private security in Chicago, saw the news about Millbrook Heights. "Your neck of the woods, right? Police chiefs getting some heat over excessive force complaints. Thought you should know." Warren frowned, pulling up local news on his computer. Several articles mentioned Police Chief Gordon Anderson and a pattern of complaints that seemed to disappear from official records. Anderson had been chief for 8 years, appointed after his predecessor resigned amid scandal. The appointment had been controversial. Anderson's background was more political than practical, with strong connections to Mayor Terrence Wells and several city council members. Interesting, but not immediately concerning. Warren's family kept a low profile, and he made sure never to cross paths with local law enforcement in any professional capacity. His military record was exemplary, his business license spotless, and his taxes paid in full every year. The afternoon passed quietly until Warren's phone rang at 3:47 p.m. Andrea's number. "Warren." Her voice was tight, controlled. "I need you to come to Millbrook, General. Now." His blood chilled. "What happened?" "It's Julie. She's hurt. Someone pushed her down the stairs at school. She's conscious, but Warren." Andrea's voice broke. "It wasn't an accident." Warren was already reaching for his keys, his mind shifting into the cold, analytical mode that had served him in combat zones. How bad? Possible concussion, definitely bruised ribs. But Warren, she said it was Tyler Anderson, the police chief's son. The name hit Warren like a physical blow. He'd heard about Tyler Anderson, 18 years old, star quarterback, heading to state on a football scholarship. Also rumored to be untouchable, protected by his father's position and the town's investment in the football program. I'm on my way. Don't say anything to anyone until I get there. As Warren drove toward the hospital, his hands steady on the wheel despite the rage building in his chest, he began processing scenarios. Tyler Anderson had hurt his daughter. That was unacceptable. But more than that, Warren's instincts, honed by years of reading threats and assessing enemies, told him this wasn't random teenage violence. This felt calculated, targeted. Someone had decided to send Warren Parker a message. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Chapter 2. The Line in the Sand. The hospital's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as Warren strode through the emergency department. He found Andrea in the family waiting area, her victim's advocate composure cracked, revealing the frightened mother beneath. Where is she? Warren's voice was calm, but Andrea knew him well enough to recognize the dangerous stillness that had settled over him. Room 12. The doctor says she'll be fine physically, but Warren... Andrea's hands trembled as she reached for his. She's scared. Really scared. She said Tyler Anderson cornered her at the top of the science building stairs. He said something about her family needing to know their place, then shoved her hard. Warren's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Witnesses? 3 students saw it. They gave statements to the school principal, but then Andrea's voice dropped. Principal Chambers called me an hour ago. He said the witnesses are now claiming they didn't see clearly what happened. They're saying it might have been an accident. The pieces clicked into place in Warren's mind with military precision. Someone had gotten to the witnesses. Someone with enough influence to make teenagers change their stories within hours. I want to see her. Julie was sitting up in the hospital bed, a bandage over her left temple and her usually bright eyes dulled with pain medication. When she saw Warren, she tried to smile, but faltered quickly. Hey, Dad. Warren pulled a chair close to her bed, his expression soft, but his eyes alert. Tell me exactly what happened, sweetheart. Every detail. Julie's account matched Andrea's summary, but she added crucial details. Tyler Anderson hadn't just pushed her. He'd waited until the hallway was empty except for the 3 witnesses, all younger students he apparently knew he could intimidate later. His words had been specific. Your family thinks they're better than everyone else. Time you learn different. Julie, has Tyler Anderson ever spoken to you before? Ever shown any interest in you at all? She shook her head. Never. I barely knew who he was until today. That's what made it so weird. It felt like he was told to do it. Warren's suspicions crystallized into certainty. This wasn't teenage aggression. This was a message. But from whom and why? The answer came 2 hours later as Warren was leaving the hospital with his family. His phone rang, an unknown local number. Mr. Parker? This is Chief Anderson. I understand there was an incident at the school today involving your daughter and my son. Warren stepped away from Andrea and Julie, his voice carefully neutral. That's correct, Chief. Your son assaulted my daughter. A low chuckle came through the phone. Now, Mr. Parker, that's a serious accusation. For what I understand, it was just kids being kids. Accidents happen. My daughter has 3 witnesses who saw your son deliberately push her down a flight of stairs. Funny thing about witnesses, Mr. Parker, memory can be unreliable, especially in teenage kids under pressure. The threat in Anderson's voice was subtle but unmistakable. My advice? Let this go. My son is untouchable. I know Judge Morrison personally. We go way back. Any charges you try to bring will disappear faster than morning fog. Warren felt the familiar calm that preceded violence, a state he hadn't experienced since his last deployment. Is that so? Drop this case, Parker, or things might get complicated for you and your family. I'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings that might require police intervention. False shooting reports happen all the time. Tragic, really, when law-abiding citizens get caught up in situations they can't control. The line went dead. Warren stood in the hospital parking lot, watching Andrea help Julie into their car, and made a decision that would change everything. Gordon Anderson had just threatened his family, had implied he would fabricate evidence to destroy Warren's life if he pursued justice for his daughter. Warren Parker had spent 12 years learning how to neutralize threats to American interests overseas. He'd studied enemy networks, identified pressure points, and executed operations that dismantled organizations far more sophisticated than a small-town police department. Gordon Anderson had no idea what he'd just awakened. Warren called Anderson's number back. The chief answered on the first ring, probably expecting Warren to capitulate. "Chief Anderson, this is Warren Parker. You have 10 minutes to turn your son in and issue a public apology, or I'll use something you can't tolerate." Anderson's laughter was genuinely amused. "You think you can threaten me, Parker? I run this town. I know every judge, every prosecutor, every 9 minutes and 50 seconds, Warren said, and hung up. He walked back to his car, where Andrea was waiting with questions in her eyes. Who was that? Chief Anderson. He just made a very serious mistake. Warren's phone was already buzzing with incoming calls. Anderson, probably realizing that Warren's calm certainty meant something different than the chief had initially assumed. Warren let them go to voicemail. Instead, he opened an encrypted app on his phone and sent a single message to Salvador Decker, code yellow. Need you in Millbrook Heights tonight. Bring the kid. Andrea studied his face in the dim parking lot light. Warren, what are you planning? Justice, Andrea. Pure and simple justice. As they drove home, Warren's mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating angles and possibilities. Gordon Anderson thought he was untouchable because he'd operated in a small pond with small fish. But Warren Parker had hunted sharks in deep water. The chief would learn the difference soon enough. Chapter 3. The Network Unveiled. Salvador Decker arrived at Warren's house at 11 p.m., carrying a nondescript black duffel bag. At 38, Salvador retained the lean build of his Special Forces days, and his dark eyes missed nothing as he surveyed the Parker household security setup with professional approval. Julie okay? Salvador asked, settling into Warren's home office. She will be. It's the principle of the thing now. Warren poured 2 glasses of bourbon. The good stuff he saved for special occasions or very bad days. Anderson threatened my family, Sal. Implied he'd fabricate evidence. Maybe even arrange a shooting. Salvador's expression darkened. Amateur hour. What do you need? Warren activated the white noise generator he used for sensitive client calls, then pulled up his laptop. Everything on Gordon Anderson, his son Tyler, and their network. I've got basic background, but I need the deep dive. For the next 3 hours, they worked with the methodical precision of their military days. Salvador's contacts in various federal agencies provided access to databases that revealed a troubling pattern. Gordon Anderson's financial records showed a lifestyle that significantly exceeded his police chief salary. Property purchases, expensive vacations, his son's private training camps, all funded by sources that didn't officially exist. Look at this, Salvador said, pointing to a series of payments traced through shell companies. Anderson's been taking money from Marco Construction for the past 4 years. Marco gets every major city contract despite consistently higher bids. Warren studied the data flow. It's not just construction. Look at the patrol patterns. He overlaid Anderson's deployment schedules with crime statistics. Drug crimes are down 40% in the Riverside district, but arrests are down 70%. Either they're the most effective police force in state history, or someone's getting paid to look the other way. Salvador pulled up property records. Riverside District. Guess who owns half the rental properties there? The name that appeared made Warren's jaw clench. Terrence Wells. The mayor who had appointed Anderson. The same mayor whose campaign contributions came largely from a consortium of businesses that had thrived under Anderson's selective law enforcement. It's bigger than I thought, Warren murmured. Anderson's not just protecting his son. He's protecting an entire operation. Salvador leaned back in his chair. You want to take down a corruption network, not just get payback for Julie. I want both. Warren's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. These people think they're untouchable because they've operated without real opposition. Time to show them what opposition looks like. At 2:30 a.m., Warren's secure phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I hear you ask questions about Gordon Anderson. Meet me at Riverside Diner tomorrow, 3 p.m. Come alone. A friend. Salvador raised an eyebrow. That was fast. Warren smiled for the first time since the hospital. Anderson's network has cracks. Someone wants to talk. He closed the laptop and stood. Get some sleep, Sal. Tomorrow we start building our own network. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. Warren answered the door to find a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and prematurely gray hair. She wore a simple business suit and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. Mr. Parker? I'm Melissa Lester, Internal Affairs, State Police. I'd like to speak with you about Chief Anderson. Warren invited her in, noting how her eyes automatically cataloged entry points, sight lines, and potential threats. Another professional. How did you hear about yesterday's incident so quickly? Warren asked. We've been watching Anderson for months. Your daughter's assault was the first time he or his son directly threatened someone with the resources to fight back. Melissa accepted the coffee Andrea offered. We know about the corruption, Mr. Parker. We know about the money, the fixed contracts, the selective law enforcement. What we don't have is someone willing to testify who can't be intimidated or bought. Warren studied her carefully. What makes you think I can't be intimidated or bought? Because you called Anderson back and gave him a deadline. Because you didn't file a police report. You went straight to the hospital and started making your own calls. Because according to your military record, you've operated in environments where local authority couldn't be trusted. Melissa leaned forward. We need your help to bring Anderson down legally. But more than that, I think you need our help to make sure this doesn't escalate into something that destroys your family. Andrea spoke for the first time. What do you mean, escalate? Melissa's expression grew grim. Anderson's not just corrupt, Mrs. Parker. He's dangerous. 3 witnesses to police misconduct have had accidents in the past 2 years. 2 moved out of state suddenly after family members were arrested on suspicious charges. Anderson doesn't just cover up, he eliminates problems. Warren felt the familiar tactical calm settle over him. What's your timeline? We're close. Maybe 6 weeks to build an airtight case. But Anderson's getting desperate. The state's been asking questions about his budget discrepancies, and federal attention is starting to focus on Millbrook Heights. He's going to move against anyone he sees as a threat, including my family, especially your family. Your daughter's assault wasn't random, Mr. Parker. It was a test. Anderson wanted to see how you'd react, how much noise you'd make. Melissa stood. Work with us. Help us build the legal case, and we'll protect your family through the process. Warren walked her to the door, considering the offer. Legal justice was slow, uncertain, and often incomplete. But it was also clean, leaving no room for the kind of collateral damage that kept him awake some nights. I'll think about it, he said. After Melissa left, Andrea confronted him in the kitchen. Warren, what aren't you telling me? Yesterday you were angry about Julie, but now you're talking like we're all in danger. Warren took his wife's hands, meeting her eyes directly. Anderson threatened to kill me, Andrea. In so many words, he threatened to fabricate evidence and arrange a shooting. He's not just some corrupt small-town cop. He's running an operation, and we've stumbled into it. Andrea's face paled. So, we work with Internal Affairs. We do this legally. Maybe. But first, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Warren checked his watch. I've got a meeting at 3. Someone wants to talk about Anderson. Someone on the inside. Warren, Andrea's voice carried a warning he'd heard before, usually right before he made decisions that changed everything. Promise me you won't do anything that puts us in more danger. Warren kissed her forehead, smelling the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the warmth of the woman who'd stood by him through deployments and career changes and the slow process of learning to live in a world where the rules were different than they'd been in uniform. I promise I'll protect our family, he said, whatever it takes. It wasn't quite the promise she'd asked for, and they both knew it. Chapter 4. The Inside Man. The Riverside Diner occupied a corner lot in the section of town where police patrols were notably scarce. Warren arrived early, choosing a booth with clear sight lines to both entrances and the kitchen. Old habits, but useful ones. At exactly 3 p.m., a man in his 50s slid into the opposite seat. Warren recognized him immediately. Randall Mitchell, one of Anderson's senior detectives. Mitchell's hangdog expression and nervous energy suggested a man carrying a heavy burden. "Mr. Parker, I appreciate you coming." Warren waited, letting the silence work for him, a technique that had served him well in interrogations overseas. Mitchell fidgeted with his coffee cup. "I've been a cop for 23 years. Good cop, I thought. Did my job, followed the rules, try to serve and protect." He looked up at Warren. "Anderson's destroyed all of that." "How?" "It started small. Look the other way on a traffic stop here. Lose some paperwork there." Anderson said it was about priorities. Focus on real crime, not nickel and dime stuff. Made sense at first. Mitchell's voice grew bitter. But then it got bigger. Evidence disappearing in drug cases. Assault charges getting dropped because witnesses suddenly couldn't remember what they saw. And if you ask questions, you became a problem. Detective Morris Chambers asked too many questions last year. Good cop, 15 years on the force. He started documenting inconsistencies in Anderson's cases. Then he got caught in a sting operation that everyone knew was bogus, planted drugs in his locker, anonymous tip about police corruption. Anderson had to reluctantly fire his own detective to maintain department integrity. Warren processed this information, already seeing the patterns. "What changed? Why are you talking to me now?" Mitchell's laugh was hollow. "Because of what Tyler did to your daughter. And because of what Anderson said afterward." "Which was?" "He called Tyler into his office, and I was in the next room. The walls are thin." Anderson didn't yell. He congratulated him. Said it was a perfect demonstration of control. Said your daughter needed to understand that some families in this town have consequences for stepping out of line. Warren's grip on his coffee cup tightened slightly. "My family stepped out of line how?" "Your wife's been working on some cases that make Anderson nervous. Domestic violence cases where the perpetrators have connections to his network. She's been advocating for victims who might otherwise be pressured to drop charges." Mitchell leaned forward. "Anderson sees your wife as a threat to his operation. Attacking your daughter was meant to send a message. Back off or face consequences." The tactical part of Warren's mind was already working through implications. Andrea's work had inadvertently threatened Anderson's protection network. The assault on Julie was both punishment and warning. But there was something else, something in Mitchell's manner that suggested more immediate danger. "There's something else." Mitchell confirmed Warren's suspicion. "Anderson's planning something. He's been making calls to contacts outside the department. Private security types, ex-military contractors. The kind of people who handle special problems." Warren's blood chilled. "Timeline? Soon. Maybe days. Anderson's under pressure from the state investigation, and he knows your military background makes you more dangerous than the usual citizens he intimidates." Mitchell slid a manila envelope across the table. "This is everything I could copy without triggering security protocols. Financial records, communication logs, the real files on the cases Anderson's been manipulating." Warren pocketed the envelope without opening it. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I've got a daughter too, and because I took an oath to serve and protect, not to enable a sociopath with a badge." Mitchell stood to leave, then paused. "Mr. Parker? Anderson's dangerous, but he's not smart. He's relied on intimidation and corruption for so long that he's forgotten how to deal with real opposition. Use that." That evening, Warren spread Mitchell's intelligence across his office desk while Salvador analyzed the patterns. The scope of Anderson's network was impressive. Judges, prosecutors, city council members, business owners, and even state legislators. But Warren's trained, I spotted the vulnerabilities. "Look at the communication pattern." Warren pointed to a series of phone logs. "Anderson's the hub. Everything flows through him. Classic command structure weakness. Cut off the head, the body dies." Salvador nodded. "But cutting off the head means neutralizing someone with significant protection and resources. This isn't like taking down a terror cell in Afghanistan. No, Warren agreed. It's better. Anderson's operating on his home turf, which makes him confident but predictable. He's got civilian oversight, legal constraints, and public accountability, all things that could be turned against him. Warren's secure phone buzzed. Another unknown number, but this time the message made him smile. The cop's kid is bragging about pushing the war hero's daughter. Says his daddy made the soldier back down. Thought you want to know. Another friend. Anderson had made a critical error. He'd allowed Tyler to spread the story, probably as a way to reinforce the family's untouchable status. But in doing so, he'd given Warren something invaluable, public confirmation of guilt and motive. Sal, I need you to reach out to the old network. Anyone who owes us favors, anyone who specializes in information warfare, anyone who's ever wanted to take down a corrupt police department. Salvador grinned, the first genuinely happy expression Warren had seen from him since arriving. Finally, I was wondering when you'd stop playing defense. Warren looked at the photo of Julie on his desk, remembering her bright smile before Tyler Anderson had put fear in her eyes. Then he thought about Anderson's laugh, his casual dismissal of Warren's threat, his assumption that a small-town police chief could intimidate a former Army intelligence officer. Anderson was about to learn that some people couldn't be intimidated, and some people didn't forget. Chapter 5, The Web Titans. Warren's transformation began subtly. To Andrea and Julie, he seemed calmer, more present, spending extra time helping with homework, cooking elaborate dinners, ensuring their daily routines felt normal and secure. But Salvador recognized the signs. Warren was entering operational mode, that state of heightened awareness and methodical planning that had made him legendary in military circles. The first move came 72 hours after Anderson's phone call. Warren had spent those days studying the intelligence Mitchell provided, cross-referencing it with public records and social media patterns his old network had analyzed. The picture that emerged was even uglier than expected. Anderson's corruption network stretched beyond simple graft. Drug dealers operated freely in the Riverside district as long as they paid tribute. Domestic violence cases disappeared when the perpetrators had connections. Even drunk driving arrests could be made to vanish for the right price. But every system had pressure points. Warren's opportunity came through an unexpected source. Julius Chambers, the high school principal who had mysteriously seen his witnesses change their stories. Warren had researched Chambers extensively and discovered something interesting. The man's son had been arrested 2 years ago for drug possession, a charge that had vanished overnight. Warren appeared at Chambers' office Thursday morning without an appointment. Mr. Parker. Chambers was a thin man with nervous energy and the pallor of someone under constant stress. I'm sorry, but as I told your wife, the incident with your daughter appears to have been accidental. The witnesses were intimidated into changing their stories. Warren's voice was quiet, conversational. Just like your son's drug charges disappeared 2 years ago. Chambers' face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Warren opened a folder and placed a photograph on the principal's desk. Chambers' son Danny accepting a large envelope from Tyler Anderson behind the school gymnasium. Timestamp showing it was taken 3 weeks ago. Your son's dealing again, Mr. Chambers, with Tyler Anderson as his supplier and protection. Warren's tone remained friendly, almost casual. Anderson's got you trapped. Cover up his son's crimes, or watch your boy go to prison for distribution charges that won't disappear this time. Chambers stared at the photograph, his hands trembling slightly. How did you? I asked the right questions to the right people. Warren leaned back in his chair. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to restore the original witness statements about Tyler pushing my daughter. You're going to document every time Anderson has pressured you to modify reports or change records. And you're going to help me ensure Tyler Anderson faces consequences for what he did. I can't. You don't understand. Anderson will destroy my family. Warren placed a second photograph on the desk. Anderson himself, accepting a briefcase from a man Warren's research had identified as Vincent Marco, head of Marco Construction and suspected money launderer. Anderson's going down, Mr. Chambers. The question is whether you go down with him or help clean up the mess he's made of this town. Warren's voice carried absolute certainty. I'm giving you the chance to be on the right side of history. Chambers studied Warren's face, perhaps recognizing something in the former soldier's expression that suggested this wasn't a negotiation. What guarantee do I have that you can protect my family if I help you? Warren smiled, not warmly, but with the confidence of a man who had never lost a battle he'd chosen to fight. You have my word, and unlike Anderson's promises, mine comes with the resources to back it up. That afternoon, Warren received an encrypted message from Salvador. Package delivered. Anderson's banking records, communication logs, and surveillance footage are now in the hands of FBI Special Agent Carolina McKenzie, Financial Crimes Division. She's very interested in Anderson's unexplained assets. The second phase was already in motion. Warren had learned from his military career that successful operations required multiple pressure points activated simultaneously. Anderson could handle one investigation, maybe two, but Warren was orchestrating something more comprehensive. By Thursday evening, Warren's network had identified 17 separate federal violations in Anderson's operation. By Friday morning, agents from 3 different agencies were asking questions in Millbrook Heights about everything from civil rights violations to money laundering. Anderson called Warren at 6 p.m. Friday, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. You think you're smart, Parker? You think bringing in outside investigators protects you? I think justice protects me, Chief. Just like it's going to protect my daughter. Your daughter was just the beginning. You want to play games with me? Let's play. But understand, I've been doing this for 8 years. I know how to make problems disappear permanently. Warren had been recording the call through an app Salvador had installed. Are you threatening my family again, Chief Anderson? A pause. Then, I'm explaining reality to someone who seems confused about how this town works. I understand perfectly. You're a corrupt police chief who uses his position to enrich himself and protect criminals, including your son. You threaten innocent families when they seek justice. And you're about to discover that some people can't be intimidated. We'll see about that. The line went dead, but Warren was already smiling. Anderson had just provided additional recorded evidence of threats against Warren's family. Evidence that was already being transmitted to Special Agent McKenzie. Salvador emerged from the kitchen, where he'd been monitoring police communications. Anderson just put out a BOLO alert for your vehicle. Claims you're a person of interest in a harassment investigation. Warren nodded calmly. Right on schedule. He's getting desperate, making moves that expose him further. Andrea appeared in the doorway, having overheard the conversation. Warren, this is escalating beyond what we can handle. Maybe we should take Julie and leave town until this blows over. No. Warren's voice carried absolute finality. We don't run from bullies, Andrea. We face them. And we win. He walked to his safe and withdrew a handgun, checking the load with practiced efficiency. But we also don't fight fair when our family's safety is at stake. As evening fell over Millbrook Heights, Warren Parker looked out at his quiet suburban street and made a decision that would echo through the corridors of power for years to come. Gordon Anderson wanted to play by rules that favored corruption and intimidation. Warren Parker was about to introduce him to a different set of rules entirely. Chapter 6, The Trap Springs. Warren's phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m. with an emergency alert. Multiple police units were responding to reports of shots fired at his address. He was already awake, watching the street from his bedroom window through night vision optics Salvador had provided. They're staging it, he murmured to Andrea, who was pulling on clothes with practiced efficiency. Living with a former intelligence officer had taught her to react quickly to unexpected situations. Salvador's voice crackled through Warren's earpiece. For units, coming in fast. Anderson's in the lead vehicle. No actual shots fired. This is the false shooting he threatened you with. Warren activated the home's security system, which began recording everything from 12 different angles. Julie, stay in your room and record everything on your phone. Don't come out until I tell you. The pounding on the front door began at 2:24 a.m. Warren opened it to find Chief Anderson flanked by 4 officers, all with weapons drawn. Warren Parker, you're under arrest for terrorist threats and harassment of a police officer. Warren raised his hand slowly, his voice carrying across the quiet neighborhood. Chief Anderson, I'm unarmed and complying with your orders. My family and I have been asleep. We've made no threats against anyone. Sir, we have multiple reports of shots fired from this address and evidence of threatening communications directed at police personnel. Warren smiled slightly. Chief, my home security system has been recording for the past hour. So have my neighbors' Ring doorbells. So has a news crew that's been parked down the street since yesterday. Anderson's confident expression faltered slightly as he noticed the Channel 7 van positioned with a clear view of the arrest. Warren had anticipated this move, had leaked the tip about Anderson's plan to the one local reporter who hadn't been bought off. Charlene Mills, an investigative journalist who'd been trying to expose police corruption for months. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, Anderson ordered, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Warren spoke clearly for the cameras and recording devices. Chief Anderson, I want it on record that my family and I have committed no crimes. We've been asleep in our home. No shots were fired from this address, and I have never threatened any police officer. This arrest appears to be retaliation for my daughter reporting your son's assault on her at school. Anderson's jaw tightened. Save it for the judge, Parker. But Warren wasn't done. Chief, since we're being recorded by multiple sources, I'd like to ask, did your son Tyler tell you that he pushed my daughter down the school stairs? And did you threaten to frame me for a crime unless I dropped any charges against him? That's enough. Anderson snapped, then immediately realized his mistake. His angry reaction, combined with Warren's calm questions, created exactly the narrative Warren wanted. A corrupt chief silencing a father seeking justice for his daughter. Warren was processed and held overnight, exactly as he'd expected. Salvador had already coordinated with Melissa Lester to ensure Warren's safety in custody, and by morning, 3 different lawyers were filing motions challenging the arrest legality. But the real victory came at 7 a.m., when Salvador called with an update that made Warren smile in his holding cell. Anderson's finished. The arrest gave McKinsey probable cause for emergency warrants. FBI's been inside Anderson's office since 4 a.m. They found everything. The second set of books, the payment schedules, even recorded conversations with Mayor Wells about managing witnesses. Warren was released at noon without charges. The shooting reports had been proven false, and no evidence existed of the alleged threats. As he walked out of the police station, Charlene Mills was waiting with a camera crew. Mr. Parker, do you have any comment about your arrest? Warren stopped, facing the camera directly. Chief Anderson arrested me last night for crimes that never happened, using evidence that doesn't exist in retaliation for my daughter reporting his son's assault. This isn't law enforcement. It's abuse of power. And I have faith that justice will prevail. By evening, the story had gone viral on social media. War hero arrested in false shooting report after daughter assaulted by police chief's son. The narrative Warren had carefully constructed was spreading beyond Anderson's ability to control. But Anderson wasn't finished. At 8 p.m., as Warren was having dinner with his family, Salvador burst through the front door. We need to move. Now. Salvador's urgency was unmistakable. Mitchell just called. Anderson's lost it completely. He's authorized a no-knock raid on your house for tomorrow morning. Claims anonymous tip about weapons cache and terrorist planning. Andrea stood up so quickly her chair fell over. He's going to have us killed and claim we resisted arrest. Warren was already moving, his mind shifting into combat mode. How long do we have? 6 hours, maybe less. McKinsey's trying to get federal intervention, but the local judge signed the warrant. Anderson's calling in favors, burning bridges to take you down before the FBI investigation reaches him. Warren looked at his family. Andrea's determined fear, Julie's wide eyes, the comfortable home they'd built together, and made his final calculation. Legal justice was too slow. Anderson was escalating to lethal force. Time for different rules. Andrea, take Julie to your sister's house in Pennsylvania. Drive straight through. Don't stop. Don't call anyone until you're there. Warren, what are you going to do? Warren kissed his wife, holding her close enough to memorize the feeling. I'm going to end this. Tonight. As Andrea and Julie packed hastily, Warren turned to Salvador. Remember that favor the agency owes us from the Karachi operation? Salvador's grin was predatory. The one involving the untraceable communication intercepts and the creative evidence placement? That's the one. Time to collect. Warren Parker had spent his career neutralizing threats to American interests. Tonight, Gordon Anderson would learn that threatening Warren's family had made him an enemy of the United States. The war was about to begin. Chapter 7. The War Begins. At 11 p.m., Warren's secure phone rang with a call from Washington, D.C. The voice on the other end belonged to someone Warren hadn't spoken to in 5 years. Colonel Melissa Crawford, now running a classified intelligence unit that officially didn't exist. Warren, heard you've got a local problem that's escalated beyond local solutions. Melissa. Warren felt a familiar surge of confidence. Crawford had been his commanding officer during his most successful operations, and her involvement meant resources that made Anderson's entire network look like amateur hour. Appreciate the callback. Salvador filled me in. Corrupt police chief, threatened family, imminent lethal force. We've been tracking similar operations across the country, local corruption networks that pose national security risks. Your Chief Anderson is connected to larger problems. Warren processed this information, understanding immediately. Money laundering for organized crime? Among other things. The Riverside district your detective mentioned? It's a transit hub for drugs moving from Mexican cartels to East Coast distribution centers. Anderson's not just taking bribes. He's providing security for a major criminal enterprise. This changed everything. Warren had assumed Anderson was simply a corrupt local official. Instead, he was part of an organization with resources and reach that explained his confidence in threatening a former military intelligence officer. What's my authorization level? Warren asked. Broad discretion to neutralize the immediate threat to your family and disrupt the criminal network. Full agency backing for any actions taken in defense of national security interests. Crawford's voice carried the weight of official sanction. Warren, this is off the books, but it's not unsupported. You have resources. Salvador was already unpacking equipment Warren hadn't seen in years. Signal interceptors, encrypted communication devices, and other items that civilian law enforcement couldn't identify, much less counter. At midnight, Warren implemented the first phase of his operation. Using Crawford's resources, he gained access to Anderson's personal communications and discovered the chief's plan in detail. The no-knock raid was scheduled for 4 a.m., but it was a cover story. Anderson's real intention was to claim Warren had opened fire on police, justifying lethal force. The participating officers had been carefully selected, all members of Anderson's inner circle, all compromised by their participation in the corruption network. But Warren also discovered something that made him smile grimly. Tyler Anderson was supposed to be at a college recruitment event in the state capitol tonight. Except the boy had lied to his father and was actually a house party in Riverside, probably dealing drugs to his classmates. Sal, how would you feel about collecting some evidence? Salvador checked his watch. Kid's probably high as a kite by now. Perfect time for a citizen's arrest. At 1:30 a.m., Salvador and two contractors Crawford had provided intercepted Tyler Anderson leaving the party. The boy was indeed intoxicated and carrying enough controlled substances to face serious federal charges. But more importantly, he was also carrying detailed text conversations with his father about the assault on Julie and the planned raid on Warren's house. Warren reviewed the messages on his secure tablet, his anger crystallizing into cold purpose. Tyler had bragged to his father about making Julie cry, about how she'd begged him not to hurt her before he pushed her down the stairs. Anderson had responded with praise and encouragement, treating his son's cruelty as a successful intimidation tactic. At 2:45 a.m., Warren called Anderson's personal cell phone. Who is this? Anderson's voice was groggy but alert. This is Warren Parker. I believe you're looking for my son. A pause. What the hell are you talking about? Oh, I'm sorry, did I say my son? I meant your son. Tyler's currently in federal custody on drug trafficking charges. Interesting reading his text messages with you about assaulting my daughter and planning to murder me. The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. When Anderson spoke again, his voice was different, smaller, desperate. Where is he? What have you done? I've done exactly what I told you I would do, Chief. I used something you can't tolerate. The truth. Tyler's confessing to federal agents right now about the drug operation you've been protecting, the assault on my daughter, and your plan to kill me tonight. You son of a bitch. Chief Anderson, I want you to listen very carefully. In approximately 15 minutes, FBI agents are going to arrest you for conspiracy, civil rights violations, and about 20 other federal crimes. You can surrender peacefully, or you can resist and discover how expensive that choice becomes for your family and your co-conspirators. Warren could hear Anderson moving around, probably reaching for weapons or trying to destroy evidence. This isn't over, Parker. You think taking down one police chief solves anything? There are others. People with more resources than you can imagine. I'm counting on it, Warren replied calmly. Every move you've made tonight has been monitored by federal authorities. Every call you're about to make will be recorded. Every person you contact is going to be investigated as a potential co-conspirator. You didn't just threaten my family. Chief, you handed me the keys to your entire operation. At 3:17 a.m., FBI agents surrounded Anderson's house. The chief came out shooting, exactly as Warren had predicted. He wounded one agent before being taken down non-lethally, but his violent resistance provided legal justification for everything that followed. Warren watched the news coverage from his secure location, Salvador and Crawford's team monitoring all communications to ensure no retaliation attempts reached Warren's family. Anderson's arrest triggered a cascade of additional arrests as the FBI's evidence unraveled the entire corruption network. Mayor Wells was arrested at 6 a.m. Vincent Marco's construction company was raided at dawn. Judge Morrison was taken into custody while trying to flee the state. By noon, 17 officials and business leaders were in federal custody. But Warren's personal victory came at 4:12 p.m. when he received a call from Internal Affairs Detective Randall Mitchell. Mr. Parker, Tyler Anderson just pled guilty to assault charges against your daughter. Full confession, no plea bargain. He's looking at 18 months in juvenile detention, followed by 5 years probation. Warren closed his eyes, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he'd been carrying since Anderson's first phone call. What changed his mind? Reality. With his father in federal custody and the protection network dismantled, Tyler's just a scared 18-year-old who realized he's not untouchable after all. That evening, Warren brought Andrea and Julie home. As they sat in their living room, the same room where Warren had first planned Anderson's downfall, Julie asked the question Warren had been expecting. Dad, how did you know exactly what would happen? How did you predict all of Anderson's moves? Warren considered his answer carefully. Sweetheart, some people think power means being able to hurt others without consequences. But real power means being able to protect the people you love, no matter what it costs. He smiled at his daughter, seeing the brightness returning to her eyes. And sometimes, when someone threatens your family, you remind them that they're not the only ones who know how to fight. Outside, the last of the news vans was pulling away. Millbrook Heights was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. The peace that comes after justice has been served, and the wolves have been reminded that there are still sheepdogs in the world. Gordon Anderson had been right about one thing. His son was untouchable. He just hadn't counted on meeting someone who specialized in touching the untouchable. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Warren's phone rang at exactly 9 a.m., precisely 9 minutes after the deadline he'd given Anderson 3 days ago. The voice on the other end was broken, desperate, a far cry from the arrogant police chief who had threatened Warren's family. Who are you? I'll put my son in jail. Just stop what you've done. Warren Parker stood in his office, looking out at the morning sun streaming across Millbrook Heights, and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Chief Anderson, you sound distressed. You've destroyed everything. The FBI has frozen all my accounts. My wife's been arrested. Tyler's facing federal charges. The entire department is under investigation. Anderson's voice cracked. What do you want? Money? I'll give you everything I have. Just make this stop. Warren's voice remained perfectly calm. I want justice for my daughter, Chief. I want a corrupt police officer to face consequences for protecting criminals and threatening innocent families. I want this town to remember that some people actually believe in doing the right thing. You don't understand. There are people above me. People who won't tolerate this kind of exposure. They'll come after you, after your family. Let them come. Warren's tone carried the confidence of a man who had faced down enemies in 3 different countries and never lost. I've spent my career neutralizing threats to American citizens. Anyone who wants to threaten my family is welcome to try. The truth was, Anderson's network had already surrendered. Mayor Wells had begun cooperating with federal investigators within hours of his arrest, providing evidence against everyone from city council members to state legislators. Judge Morrison was attempting to negotiate a plea deal by offering information about other corrupt officials across the state. The criminal enterprise that had seemed so formidable to local residents crumbled the moment it faced professional investigation. Warren had learned something important during his military career. Corrupt systems were inherently weak because they were built on self-interest rather than principle. When pressure was applied, every member of the network immediately began calculating how to save themselves, usually by betraying their co-conspirators. Chief Anderson, Warren continued, I gave you 10 minutes to do the right thing. Instead, you chose to threaten my family and attempt to have me killed. Now you're facing federal charges that will put you in prison for the rest of your life. And your son is learning that actions have consequences. Please. Anderson's voice was barely a whisper. I'll confess to everything. I'll resign. I'll make sure Tyler apologizes to your daughter publicly. It's too late for that. Warren's voice hardened. You had your chance to be a man of integrity. You chose to be a criminal instead. Now you face criminal consequences. Warren hung up and turned to find Andrea watching him from the doorway. She'd been listening to his side of the conversation, and her expression was unreadable. Is it over? She asked. The immediate threat, yes. Anderson's finished, his network's dismantled, and Tyler's going to pay for what he did to Julie. Warren moved to embrace his wife. But there's cleanup to do. People to interview, testimony to give, trials to attend. And after that, Warren considered the question. His reputation in certain circles had been significantly enhanced by the Anderson operation. Colonel Crawford had already hinted at consulting opportunities that would leverage his success in dismantling corruption networks. There were other Andersons in other towns, other families who needed protection from officials who thought badges made them untouchable. After that, we rebuild. Julie finishes high school without fear. You continue your advocacy work knowing that corrupt officials understand there are consequences for threatening victims. And I continue protecting families who can't protect themselves. Andrea studied his face. You've changed, Warren. Since this started, you're different. More focused. Warren nodded slowly. I remembered something I'd forgotten since leaving the Army. There's a difference between keeping your head down and keeping your family safe. Anderson reminded me which one actually matters. That afternoon, Warren attended Tyler Anderson's sentencing hearing. The boy looked small and frightened in his orange jumpsuit, a dramatic change from the arrogant teenager who had smiled for cameras after assaulting Julie. Julie had chosen to attend, despite Warren's concerns. She wanted to face Tyler Anderson, to see justice delivered for what he'd done. As Warren watched his daughter, poised, dignified, unafraid, he felt a fierce pride in the young woman she was becoming. When Tyler was led away to begin his 18-month detention, he looked directly at Warren with something that might have been hatred or might have been fear. Warren stared back calmly, his expression conveying a simple message. You hurt my daughter. You face consequences. Remember that. After the hearing, District Attorney Cecil Weber approached Warren in the courthouse hallway. Weber was one of the few local officials who had remained clean during Anderson's reign, largely because he'd been politically weak and therefore not worth corrupting. Mr. Parker, I owe you an apology and a debt of gratitude. Warren shook the man's hand. Just doing what needed to be done. No, it was more than that. You exposed a cancer that was eating away at this town's justice system. Without your actions, Anderson would still be operating, more victims would be created, and our entire legal system would have continued to be corrupted. Warren nodded, but said nothing. He learned long ago that victory speeches were for politicians. Operators did the work and moved on to the next mission. As the Parker family drove home that evening, Julie broke the comfortable silence. "Dad, why didn't you just work with the FBI from the beginning? Why did you have to make it so complicated?" Warren glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. "Because complicated situations require complicated solutions, sweetheart. And because sometimes the only way to protect good people is to remind bad people that there are consequences for their actions." "But you could have been killed. We all could have been killed." "Yes," Warren agreed. "But we weren't. And now other families won't be threatened the way we were." Julie seemed to consider this. "So you're like a protector? For people who can't protect themselves?" Warren met Andrea's eyes, seeing understanding and something that might have been approval in her expression. "Sometimes, Julie, when it's necessary." As they pulled into their driveway, Warren noticed Salvador's vehicle parked across the street. His friend raised a hand in subtle acknowledgement, still watching, still protecting, still ready for whatever came next. Warren Parker had learned something important during the Anderson operation. Justice didn't always come through official channels. Sometimes it required people willing to step outside the system to protect those who believed in it. And sometimes, when good people did nothing, evil flourished. But not in Millbrook Heights. Not anymore. Not while Warren Parker lived there. Chapter 9. The New Order. 6 months later, Warren Parker stood at the podium of the Millbrook Heights Community Center, addressing a crowd of citizens who had gathered to hear about the town's transformation. The corruption scandal had made national news, and journalists from major networks were documenting how a single father's refusal to be intimidated had exposed decades of criminal activity. "Before we begin tonight's town hall, I want to recognize someone," announced the new police chief, Detective Randall Mitchell, who had been unanimously approved by the city council. Warren Parker didn't just expose corruption. He reminded us all what integrity looks like. Warren raised a hand to decline the applause, but the crowd continued anyway. He could see Andrea and Julie in the front row, both beaming with pride. Julie had returned to school with newfound confidence, and her essay about standing up to bullies had won a statewide competition. "Thank you," Warren said finally. "But the real heroes are the police officers, prosecutors, and citizens who chose to do the right thing when it mattered. Detective Mitchell, D.A. Weber, and the federal agents who ensured justice was served." What Warren didn't mention was the continuing investigation that had expanded far beyond Millbrook Heights. Anderson's network had connections to corruption rings in 4 other states, and Warren had become an unofficial consultant to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. His expertise in reading enemy networks and identifying vulnerabilities had proven invaluable in dismantling criminal enterprises that had operated for decades. After the town hall, Warren was approached by a woman he didn't recognize. Mid-30s, professional appearance, with the alert eyes of someone in law enforcement. "Mr. Parker?" "Special Agent Irma Barlow, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Could we speak privately?" They walked to Warren's office in the community center, where Salvador was already waiting. Warren had expected this conversation. The agency had mentioned that other operations were being developed based on the Anderson takedown. "Mr. Parker, we've identified similar corruption networks in 7 other municipalities across 3 states. In each case, local law enforcement is providing protection for organized criminal activity, and federal jurisdiction is complicated by political connections and legal obstacles." Warren nodded. "You need someone who can operate outside normal channels. We need someone who understands how to dismantle these networks without getting killed in the process. Someone with the tactical expertise to identify vulnerabilities and the operational security to exploit them safely." Salvador leaned forward. "What's the scope?" "Broad. There's a network in Alabama protecting human trafficking operations. A sheriff's department in Nevada that's been paid to ignore weapons smuggling. A police chief in Florida who's been taking cartel money to protect drug distribution centers." Warren considered the offer. The work would be dangerous, would take him away from his family for extended periods, and would put him in conflict with people far more dangerous than Gordon Anderson. But it would also protect families like his own from the kind of systematic corruption that destroyed communities. "I need guarantees," Warren said finally. Full federal protection for my family, regardless of what happens to me. Clean backup when operations go sideways. And total operational discretion. I run things my way. Done. Agent Barlow handed him a folder. Your first target is Sheriff Don Cummings in Riverside County, Alabama. He's been protecting a trafficking ring that's moved over 200 victims in the past 3 years. Local investigators keep dying in accidents. Warren opened the folder, already reading the patterns he'd learned to recognize. Cummings operated exactly like Anderson. Intimidation, corruption, and violence against anyone who threatened his operation. But unlike Anderson, Cummings had killed to protect his secrets. Timeline, your choice. This isn't a rush operation. It's about permanently dismantling criminal networks. Warren looked at Salvador, who nodded slightly. His old partner was ready for another mission, another chance to protect innocent people from predators with badges. 2 weeks to prepare. Full intelligence package on Cummings, his network, and the local power structure. And I want Detective Mitchell kept informed. He's proven he can be trusted. After Agent Barlow left, Warren walked home through the quiet streets of Millbrook Heights. The changes were subtle but significant. Citizens who made eye contact instead of hurrying past, police officers who waved instead of staring, teenagers who gathered in downtown parks instead of hiding in abandoned buildings. Gordon Anderson was serving 25 years in federal prison. Tyler Anderson had completed his juvenile detention and was working in a rehabilitation program, reportedly a changed young man who spoke to other teenagers about the consequences of violence and entitlement. Mayor Wells had been sentenced to 15 years and was cooperating with investigations in 3 other states. Most importantly, Julie Parker walked to school each morning without fear, her faith in justice restored by watching her father refuse to let injustice stand unchallenged. How did it go? Andrea asked as Warren entered their kitchen. They offer me another mission. Bigger scope, more dangerous targets. Andrea studied his face. And you're going to accept? I think so. There are other families like ours, Andrea. Other daughters who deserve to be safe. Other fathers who need help protecting them. Andrea wrapped her arms around Warren's waist, resting her head against his chest. I married a soldier, didn't I? Even after you took off the uniform. You married a man who believes some things are worth fighting for. Julie appeared in the doorway, homework in hand. Dad, Mrs. Henderson said you're going to help other families deal with corrupt police officers. Warren smiled at his daughter. Something like that, sweetheart. Good. Everyone should have someone like you when the bad guys think they can't be stopped. That night, as Warren reviewed the intelligence file on Sheriff Don Cummings, he reflected on how much had changed since Tyler Anderson had pushed his daughter down those stairs. Anderson's arrogance had awakened something in Warren that civilian life had allowed to dormant. The understanding that evil flourished when good people chose comfort over confrontation. Warren Parker had built a successful business, a loving family, and a peaceful life in Millbrook Heights. But he'd also discovered that his real calling wasn't security consulting. It was ensuring that corrupt officials learned a simple truth. No one is untouchable, not when there are people willing to touch them. Warren's secure phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Crawford. Sheriff Cummings just increased security around his family. Your reputation is preceding you. He's scared. Warren smiled, closing the file and heading upstairs to kiss his daughter goodnight. Tomorrow he would begin planning the downfall of another corrupt official who thought badges made him invincible. Tonight, he would sleep peacefully in his own bed, surrounded by the family he'd protected and the community he'd saved. Gordon Anderson had been wrong about many things, but he'd been right about one. Warren Parker was dangerous, just not to the people Anderson had expected. Epilogue, 1 year later. Warren Parker sat in the witness chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, facing cameras that were broadcasting his testimony live across the nation. Behind him sat the families of corruption victims from 7 different states. Families whose lives had been destroyed by officials who thought themselves above the law. Mr. Parker, Senator Carolina McKenzie, addressed him formally, though Warren knew she was reading from questions his own team had helped develop. In your opinion, what enables corruption to flourish in American law enforcement? Warren looked directly into the cameras. Senator, Corruption flourishes when good people choose silence over action, when communities accept that some officials are above accountability, and when victims believe they have no recourse against systemic abuse. And what's the solution? Warren thought of Julie, now 17, and planning to study criminal justice in college. He thought of Andrea, whose victim advocacy work had expanded statewide. He thought of the dozens of families who had contacted him after seeing the news coverage, families who had been waiting years for someone to believe their stories and take action. The solution is simple, Warren said. Remind corrupt officials that they're not untouchable. Remind victims that they're not powerless. And remind good people that sometimes protecting justice requires more than just believing in it. Warren Parker had started as a father seeking justice for his daughter's assault. He'd become something else entirely. A reminder that in a nation founded on the principle that no one is above the law, some people still had the courage to enforce that principle. Gordon Anderson was right about one thing. His son had been untouchable until he met someone who specialized in touching the untouchable. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.